Welcome back to part 5 of how to cut gemstones, where we've been cutting this large natural blue topaz from Brazil. And that's what makes this a rare stone, because it is natural. You know, it's so rare to see blue topaz that hasn't been irradiated to give it its color. And this is a totally natural gem. During this video, we're going to be transferring it so we can cut the crown. In the crown, I'm going to try something a little different. Instead of just doing a matching step cut that would match the pavilion of the stone, which would be the normal way to do it, I'm going to put in a step facet, and then I'm going to actually move to the middle. This is kind of what you would do in a Portuguese cut, but I'm going to step to the middle of the facet, so it's actually gonna, each facet on the crown is gonna break each facet in the pavilion into two, hopefully, so we'll get more brilliance out of it. You'll see when we get started at it. I don't think I've ever done this, but with this big stone, I want to break up the light as much as possible. So hopefully that'll help, and hopefully it'll work out. Having never done it, you never know with a new style of cutting. So hopefully we don't have to recut it after I decide it doesn't work, but we'll see shortly. So let's remove this from the machine. As soon as I find my... And the first thing we want to do is clean it. You know, a couple of options for cleaning are denatured alcohol, and this actually is not denatured. This is 99% isopropyl, and you want to use these high numbers in the alcohol, because when you're dealing like with rubbing alcohol, it's 70% alcohol, but then it's got glycerin in it, a lubricant, good for your skin, but not good for stones, because you're going to affect the bond if you put a lubricant on this stone. It's what we're trying to clean off, so this 99% alcohol should be a good way to do that. So we want to get all the WD-40 off that we use to polish this stone. And we'll pick appropriate sized dop, which would be the biggest dop I have. So here's the largest dop I have. It's a 16 millimeter, and we'll clean it also. I'm guilty of forgetting to do this sometimes, but I think if you got oil on it, it's going to affect your bond, and so we'd like to have it as clean as possible. So hopefully we have enough room in this transfer jig to actually get both dops and the stone in there. So here's our finished polished stone. You know, it's a lighter color, but I think it's going to be a really pretty color. It's close, but I think it's going to fit. I don't know if I can get that back. There we go. So snug it up against that. You know, this wedge on the dop is what keeps you straight when you transfer. So you know, when using the dop, typically you just want to make sure the dop's not too big for the stone. Assuming, you know, like on this stone, I could possibly have to cut the girdle in further to get enough crown to actually make this cut work. So you want to have a small enough dop on it, not a problem with this big stone. but you want to be small enough that if you do have to cut further into the stone, you're not cutting into your dop. I'm using DevCon 5-minute epoxy. It's my choice for holding the stone onto my dops. Hopefully this is enough. This is a big stone, big dop. Once you transfer, you know, I like to wait a minimum of 3 hours, preferably overnight, for it to solidify. They state that 24 hours is full, the amount of time to get it to 100% solid, but generally 3 hours I haven't had a problem. But in a big stone like this, you're putting a lot of stress on the glue because you're pushing harder. Generally about a minute to mix. And that should do it. So I usually try and rub it into all the surfaces, the dop and the stone, just in case there's oils or something on it, or just want to get a good solid attachment. This is a little easier process when you have more room to work. And also when you're dopping, on a smaller stone, you want to make sure the glue's not sticking out further than the dop. It's very difficult to cut through glue, It has a negative effect on like the lightning lap. You can pull that material up, and it's just very hard to cut through it. So just try and keep your glue well within the boundaries of the stone. Takes a minute or two for this to get hard enough that it won't move. And you can check what the solidity of the glue is by what's left on your mixing table. So it's good. It's not going to run down the stone anymore. So we're transferred, and once that dries, we'll break the other side loose and start cutting. So our glue is dried for probably 48 hours now, so it's good and solid as it's going to be. So now we have to remove the glue from the side that we use to cut the pavilion. So this is the crown we want to cut, so we have to remove this top. A lot of glue on it, so this may take a while. I usually use a heavier blade than this, but unfortunately I took it home and don't have it, so this may take a while to cut this away. Now I use epoxy, so in removing, I heat the blade up and cut it away. I quit using wax when I was doing this exact job of transferring a stone. It was 100 karat tanzanite, and just the heat of transfer caused that stone to fracture. So that led me to cold dopping, because it's a bad day when you fracture 100 karat tanzanite. It was unusual, probably was something to do with the structure of the stone or an inclusion that was in it. But since that time, I've been using the cold dopping technique of using epoxies. So it takes a little longer to transfer a stone or dop it originally. It takes extra time. But I personally think it's well worth it, and hopefully this will come off here relatively easily. Big dop, I generally don't put glue beneath between the dop and the stone. I just glue around it so it'll remove easier. Sometimes it seeps under the stone. To remove this epoxy, we just heat up the blade and just start cutting away at the epoxy. This is usually pretty quick, but the amount of epoxy I have on this stone, this is going to take a while. So we're using an alcohol lamp, available Amazon, any lapidary supply. Just take some denatured alcohol as a fuel and With any luck, when I get this off, we have enough crown to cut the crown the way I want to, and I don't have to cut the girdle in further. Nice thing about a step cut, you can cut the girdle in further and not affect the cut. Unlike a brilliant style where what you do to the crown affects the meats on the pavilion. When we get lucky, that's what happens. It just pops right off. Now that it's free, we can put the stone back into the Ultratec V5. Now you want to make sure that you get the alignment correct. This was my 96 index right here. So I'll put it on 96 and put it in the machine. So when I'm on 96 now, I'll be cutting the 96 facets, so it should be as it was when we removed it. All right. So ready to cut. I don't have a lot of crown, hopefully enough, and I don't have to cut into the girdle again to give me more crown height. So the crown's going to be somewhat low, but hopefully thick enough crown that it'll actually function the way we want it to and give us some really good brilliance. So this first row of facets, because I know there's not a lot of crown material, I'm going to start at maybe 45. I may start at 50 for my first row of facets. You really have to look at the facet with the lowest angle. I think I've got plenty of depth here, which this would be the facet that would kind of determine whether 50 degrees works, but I'm sure it's steeper than 50, so it should work just fine. Although here's an issue. This is probably going to be our real issue right here. What is this angle at? Because I don't have much girdle left there, so that's almost where I'm going to have to test to see if 50 works or not. We may have to go lower than 50 just to get this first facet in at this point. Very thin girdle here, so we have no extra girdle to work with, so we're going to have to find out what that angle is right here. So I'm going to set the machine at 50 and see how it looks on that facet. 1050 may work, but it may be too high. It's real close. So it looks like this angle may work, but I'm actually cutting a little bit to the right on this facet, so I've got a cheat left. During transfer, this block doesn't give me a perfect transfer, so you do have to adjust the facets with the cheater. So that looks about right. And it looks like I may have enough for this row of facets. This is going to be a step cut, so this facet's only going to go up so far before I start another row. So 50 degrees was about right where I needed to be. So I'm going to go back to the 96 and actually start my cut there. So judging by the girdle facet, it looks like I'm pretty straight. Everything looks pretty square. So now I'm going to continue around the stone and get the first row of facets in. So on the step cut, I'm just going around and matching each step to the line that is made by these two girdle facets. Step cut is pretty easy once you get the girdle in. Although this variation I'm going to try, I'm not sure it actually works the way I'm hoping it does. So it could create some issues. So I've made a little blunder here, which happens. Cut on the wrong index and cut a little deep here. So what that's probably going to force me to do is cut a little bit further into the girdle to get this to be right. It's one of those mistakes you really hope not to make, but you know, shit happens. Yeah. So you really have to focus, and doing a recording like this, sometimes I think more about what I'm going to say than what I'm doing. But this is, it'll be good for you because this is something you're going to run into. You're going to cut on the wrong index. So instead of going 6 over or 90, I went to 87. And so I ended up cutting the girdle to where it's too thin. So really the only option now, which actually can be helpful to me, is to cut the girdle a little thicker. But I have to go all the way around and do that. But it's going to give me a little bit extra crown, which I kind of need. I'd rather not have had to do this. But maybe it'll help in the end. Can you see that girdle where if you look close right at the end, I just cut that girdle way too thin. This was cut at 87 instead of 90. So it just cut at an angle and cut my girdle too thin. So I've got to make that thick enough and go around and match them all up. So I had 10 minutes to our job here. So we're back with our 600 lightning lap, and I've put it on the facet that I screwed up on. And we're going to set the machine to 90. And I'll cut that to the point where I've got, at the end where I cut it off, there'll be enough material there for the girdle, and then just go around and match them all up. It was moving a little erratic, so I just loosened up the center bolt and let it turn on the machine, and if there was something between it and the lap, hopefully it gets it out, and it seems to have smoothed out a little bit. I'm going to actually go a little further than I need to, just to try and get me a little extra crown height. Now I've got enough girdle there. It no longer cuts off there at the corner. So I'm going to continue around the stone and match these up, and then we'll go on to cutting the crown of the stone. So I've fixed my little blunder, which we'll all have them from time to time. Preferably not when you're doing a video, but hey, it's a little more knowledge you can gain here. You know, when you have a problem like that, I mean, this corner just cut to a point, and if I'd just gone ahead with it, there'd have been no girdle at that point. So I went around and cut the girdle again, which actually picked me up a little bit of crown height, so it may help in the end get a little more brilliance. You know, a low crown is fine, but you can only go so low before it starts affecting the brilliance. So now I'm going to change the lap back to this 400 steel lap and see if I can get this first row of facets in correctly. So we were cutting that at 50. And actually I'm going to increase it a couple degrees. Can I do that? Change that. Seems we still have the issue on the other side of the stone that cut at 50. I'm going to keep it at 50. So those were at +3, and my next facet is +6, not +9 like I did. And I think I have an excuse for why I did that. I just cut 2 stones this morning, and they actually both had a +9 on both stones. So I think it was just memory that caused me to make that mistake. I was cutting an aqua and a tourmaline, both step cuts like this. One was 2 and 9, and the other was 3 and 9, like this. So I'm going to use that as my excuse. Try not to do it again. This one's on 60 either side, so it's 96 and 6 instead of 9 and 87. Whoops. Almost said it there again. All right. So I actually need to cut a little deeper. The issue I made did not completely go away, so I've got to cut the girdle a little bit thinner. And there it's gone. So I'm just matching exactly what I did on the pavilion side of the stone. All right, so they actually met up pretty well, and we've done our first row of facets. So this next row is where I'm going to run into issues, hopefully not, but what I'm going to do I haven't done before, so could easily be a problem. All right. After giving my plan of how to cut this crown a little more thought, I just look at it and think it's just not going to work for this odd shape. It's going to create problems that will be difficult to deal with. So I'm going to save that cut for something a little more symmetrical, something I would like to do, but this time we're just going to finish this off as a step cut. Because it's such a big stone, instead of doing 3 rows on the crown, I'm going to put an extra row in. We'll put 4 rows in, and I think it's going to work out much better that way. It's something I know how to do and know what to expect, and the other cut, just because of the shape of this stone, is just likely not going to work. So for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to finish this off as a step cut, and hopefully it'll still be a beautiful stone, because step cuts really do cut an extraordinarily beautiful stone. They're easy to do, and they're something that I find gets me higher yield on stones than some other cuts. So if you have the depth to work with, a step cut is always a good choice. So we're going to go to row 2. Row 2, we're going to drop, I think I'll drop about 7 degrees. So we're going from 50 to 43. Step cuts, I generally think you should be at least 5 degrees difference between steps. 3 is pushing it. You can do it if you're short of material. If this crown is real shallow, you can get more steps in by cutting the angle difference down. But we're going to do 7. Sometimes I'd do 10, but 7 has been my angle difference of choice on step cuts lately. So looking at how far 7 degrees is actually progressing into the stone, I think I'm going to raise it to a 10 degree difference. I'm going to drop to 40 because I'd like to get this table fairly small. And it's quite large at the moment, and it doesn't look like 7 degrees is going to make a big enough difference. So I'm going to take it down to 40 degrees. So a 10 degree difference between facets. And I'm going to cut about 2/3 the way down the first row of facets with this row. All right. So now I'll go around the stone and match this up. So there you can see the first 2 rows cut, or at least this back side of it. And I'll go on and finish it around, and then we'll go to the 3rd row of steps. So another issue, we do have a low point here, if you want to take a look, that I'm going to have to lower the angle even further, because that's not going to be a big enough step there. So I'm going to try dropping it 5 degrees and down to 35 and see if that'll work. So will that work? Well, 35 didn't work, so we're going to have to drop it to 30. I think that'll work. So the nice thing about step cuts, you can play with the numbers quite a bit. And usually it still works for brilliance. We'll see. I finished the second row. It's at 30 degrees. You know, our next problem is going to be this point right here, which is very low angle. I'm not even sure 20 is going to get us to where we want. You know, once you start getting below 20, things get a little more difficult when you're cutting. But we'll see what we need to do, and hopefully we can still get 4 rows in here. So I've set the machine at 20, and we're going to do just a little test facet here on this low spot and just trying to determine what the angle it is. I mean, it could be 15, but let's see what 20 does. So 20 is cutting fairly low here, so we're going to have to probably drop it a little more. So I'm thinking maybe 17 will work. May have to drop to 15, but particularly because there's a little divot there, which was an inclusion that's hopefully almost out. So I'm going to cut it at 15. I'm going to go back to the starting point, which is 96, and cut it around and see what we're left with. And it may be our last row. And I'm thinking maybe the 17 would work, and that'll give me enough. If I drop to 10, I can get another row in if I need to. This is our third row cut at 17 degrees. I'll finish going around, and if everything works out, then we'll cut the table in, and I'll decide whether there's room for another row of facets or we're good as is. Our third row's in, and now I'm going to cut the table. Now this machine comes with a table adapter to cut tables, but I make every attempt not to use them. For one reason, right now I'd have to take the stone out of the machine, set it up for the table, but the way I'm going to do it, I can just go right to the table and not have to make any changes. Anytime you make a change, there's always, you can always have issues with not getting everything back exactly the way it was. So I'm gonna, I always cut the tables on 96 so I know where to go back to when I polish. And just crank it up, set the machine to 0. Now on this machine, because 0 could be -5 or minus whatever, I set it to 0.01 so I know it is at or near 0, because this machine doesn't register in the negative, so I could be at a negative number and not be cutting at 0. So if I set this to 0.1, I know I'm right at about 0. Close enough. Just an issue with this dial. So if I'm cutting a 0, just so you understand, it may not truly be 0. It could be minus a degree or so. So at 0.1, I know I'm where I want to be, because this dial is very, very accurate, and 0.1 is a very small difference from 0. Oops. So you can see where we're cutting over here. Can you see? So the table's cut. You know, right now it's a little skewed, and I think it's because I was adjusting angle on this facet. And once I go back and recut on the lightning lap, all this will straighten out. You know, things I want to do, I'm going to make this first row a little larger, and probably the second row. I think I want to make these all about even sizes. So during my pre-polish, I'll make some adjustments there. And once I adjust this facet correctly and recut these, our table should be more asymmetrically symmetrical, if that's a way of describing something. You know, it's an odd shape, but right now it's not symmetrical because these two facets are screwed up. But during the pre-polish, we'll get all that straightened out. I'm sure it was just an issue of adjusting the angle that I was trying to find here, you know, So that's it for this segment, and we'll move on to polishing the crown in our next segment, which could be our final segment for this series. And hopefully this is all going to come out beautiful. Little change in the design I wanted to do, but we'll try that design later in another video, because I think it would have added some beauty to the stone, but I don't know it was going to work. So we'd like to get through this video and have this stone actually look pretty. So we're going to cut it as a straight step cut, and in a few days we'll see just how this stone looks when it's done. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next segment. If you enjoyed this video, watch the next video here. Also subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications of our latest gem-related videos. Thanks.